Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our continuing education series, Joining Forces, Empowering Voices, a collaborative approach to supporting adults using high-tech AAC. My name is Erin Edwards. Through this series, you'll find that we are passionate about building greater collaboration between BCBAs and SLPs. So all of our webinars will offer CEUs for both professions. We're also invested in improving services for adults with disabilities. So many of the examples and discussions in our presentations will focus on adults, but most of the interventions and techniques can be applied to children as well. And finally, we're enthusiastic about the potential of high-tech AAC, so our series will focus primarily on that type of communication. And next slide, please. This CEU series is brought to you through the generosity of the Edith L. Trees Charitable Trust. We are very grateful for their support and this opportunity to bring you some amazing speakers. We hope this makes a difference in your practice as a professional and in turn makes a difference in the lives of the people you support. Next slide. Some important CEU information. Please take note of the website and the email here. I'm going to try to put the instructions into the Q&A for getting CEUs, but you're also going to receive them in a follow-up email from the event tomorrow. So if you've joined us before for CEUs, you can use the direct links that are on our website. They'll say either ASHA or BACB. Under the live webinars when you registered, so the links will be there. If you're new to our series, you will need to create a profile, login, and password before you can access the quiz and evaluation to earn CEUs. But there's a step-by-step walkthrough on how to do this on our website under the Earning CEUs tab. It takes a minute or two to get set up, but you only have to do it one time. And in addition to tonight, we have planned 2 more live webinars and at least 3 more asynchronous CEU events. So check out our website for more information on what we've already recorded and what's coming up. Finally, if you have any technical questions or issues completing the post work to get your CEUs, please use the email listed here to let us know so we can try to help you out. And if you have any questions during the presentation, please put them in the Q&A. I'll be watching it and can ask questions to our speakers as they come up. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Kate Granboy and Amy Wonka. Kate is both a speech language pathologist and a board-certified behavior analyst with over 15 years of clinical experience working in private practice, outpatient clinics, outpatient hospital settings, and consulting to private schools and legal teams. She specializes in augmentative alternative communication, autism and associated disorders, language development, and integrating AAC into the educational vocational programming of persons with behavioral needs. Her interests are multidisciplinary treatment, collaboration, mentorship, and adult education, and implementation science. She is currently the co-host of the SLP Nerdcast podcast, adjunct faculty at Fitchburg State University, has several publications, and presents at national conferences. She has served as adjunct faculty at Northeastern University and is the former president and co-founder of the Speech and Language Network, Inc. She is currently enrolled as a doctoral student pursuing a PhD and an MBA at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. And Amy has worked as a speech language pathologist in the Northeast and Midwest. Prior to becoming a SLP, she worked for several years as a one-on-one paraprofessional and home service provider for individuals with complex communication needs. She has experience in home-based, public school, non-public school, and outpatient environments. Amy's clinical interests include augmentative and alternative communication, autism and other related needs, typical language development, motor speech, phonology, data collection, collaboration, coaching, and communication partner training and support, which is all right up our alley, all of those great interests. So I will turn it over to you guys. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you so much for having us. I'm not sure I've ever been given such a warm introduction.
I
So
know, that was fantastic.
that was
Thank you, Erin.
really, really lovely. Thank you. And you've made our introduction slide somewhat obsolete. So I'm going to go ahead and cruise through some of these. We are here tonight. Amy and I have known each other for a long time, and we've worked in the world of AAC for a long time. And through our collective journeys, we happen to learn a lot about data collection and why data collection is such a critical piece of what we do and often under discussed and undervalued. And we are here to talk about all of that tonight, connect a bunch of dots together, and hopefully make it not really dry and boring, because a lot of times when you talk about data collection, it can feel like it's not a very fun topic. We're also going to talk a lot about the context of AAC, including something called the SETT framework, which takes into consideration everything that's happening with around a person who uses AAC. So their personal profile, as well as their environment and the tasks that they need, and connect all of that to measurement and the clinical questions that we ask. We know that this audience is a mix of both speech language pathologists, behavior analysts, perhaps other professionals, or even parents. So we are going to try to capture information that is helpful to all of those different parties. If we cover something that you already know, please stick with us. We are going to loop it all back and hopefully tie it up together for you in a nice big bow. So the first thing that we want to do is kind of set the stage about why this is important. Why is the concept of data collection? Why are we even here? Why are we even talking about this, and why should we care, right? The first thing is, we think of data collection often as just a bunch of tally marks on a sticky note. And that is not necessarily what data collection is, and it's not what it's supposed to be. Um, Data collection in AAC is critically important because we need individuals who are using AAC to be successful communicators in all environments. Language and communication is something that we don't just use in school. We don't just use it in therapy. We don't just use it in day habs. We use it everywhere, and we use it across all of these different professions. So you'll see in this slide, we've got all of these interlocking stakeholders and communication partners. And there, it's wonderful that this talk is about collaboration, because a lot of times when you're talking about AAC related to data collection or not, there tends to be this push pull of, but I'm the speech pathologist, AAC is my realm, or I'm the behavior analyst, but communication is my realm. But you can see, when you think about communication as a whole, we need our complex communicators to be communicating everywhere with everyone. We want our communication partners to have buy-in, and that is a critically important piece. This is important for data collection because when we're going to, throughout this conversation, we're going to get into the nitty gritty of the actual methodology of collecting data. But I want everyone to continually bounce back to this bigger picture of the larger picture of communication, because we are really going to likely want to bring these communication partners in when we start talking about measurement, because we want to measure successful communication with the OT, the PT, the special educator, the day hab staff, the group home staff, the residential staff. We really want to make sure that everyone is included.
And I think connected with that, Kate and I, we've talked a lot about in our conversations. Kate's a BCBA and an SLP. I'm an SLP. We're both working in teams of other professionals. And having alignment around data and considering the data and how you're collecting it and why you're collecting it and what questions you're trying to answer can also really help support that collaboration piece. When we zoom out and think about our data collection and how we're using that to inform our practice and make changes in our clients' programming, that allows us to have more detailed conversations with all of our colleagues. It helps us be able to break things down because we've already thought about breaking it down so we can collect that data. If differences of opinion arise and we have one professional who thinks that the best way to approach something might be different from the way that we think might be the best way to approach something, having a shared conversation about data collection can help navigate some of those challenges that might pop up as well. interprofessional collaboration is in the best interest of our clients, and it's always best when it goes smoothly, but it doesn't always go smoothly. So not only can data help us make effective choices about what's best for our client, it can help us collaborate more effectively with the other people who are on the team because we really all have the same shared goal. So why is data collection important? When we're thinking about data collection and when we're thinking about communication for people who are using AAC, it's really, really dependent on our collaboration and on training and on being able to make sure that we're providing the support that we need to all of our different communication partners who are interacting with the AAC user. Um, we really do need to prioritize collaborating with other professionals, with paraprofessional staff, with direct care staff. And like Kate mentioned, language is everywhere. So these supports that we want to put in place are going to go across environments, across tasks, and we may need to differentiate the level of support and the expectations that we have depending upon who the communication partners are and what environments they're communicating in.
And the slide here, we've got little a, big C. And that's just a reminder that AAC is about communication. And so when we start talking about data collection and measurement, these systems, these particularly high tech systems, they can do everything. They can turn on the lights in your house, they can send a text message. But when we think about data collection, where we want to think about measuring things that are important, and we'll get to that, and the things that are important are communication in nature. So as we move through this presentation and talk more about data collection, it's really important as you're reflecting on your own clients to think about what you're measuring and making sure that what you are measuring is empowering and an important communication skill for the client and not just something that's associated with the bells and whistles that come with a high tech tool.
And to that point, I would also add that even though our focus is on high tech communication in this webinar, there are times when the strategy or support that's going to best support communication in that moment is not high tech. So that's important to just keep in the back of your mind. We're ultra focused on high tech in this talk, but sometimes light tech or even unaided methods like gestures, vocalizations, that may be the best fit for that particular task.
Okay. So let's talk about the word evidence. We talk a lot in both fields about evidence. A lot of people in both fields will make the argument, or I have heard the argument, that evidence is research. Both fields have an evidence-based practice triangle that is comprised of evidence, um, patient perspectives, and client perspectives and values, as well as clinical judgment. And the evidence portion of that evidence-based practice triangle can be broken up into external evidence, but it can also be broken into internal evidence. Our complex learners, particularly adults with complex communication needs, are not represented in our research. They are underrepresented. Research is full of bias. And so our internal data collection, our internal evidence is the component that helps to guide our practice for all of the reasons that we've mentioned above. But it tells us what we're doing, if what we're doing is actually working. Both of our fields also have ethical codes about competence. How do you know that you're providing competent service if you don't have evidence that what you're doing is working? So effective data collection is also an ethics related issue because of that component of providing competent service. You also can't measure anything without data. So if you're talking about any component of internal evidence or competence, you really need to go beyond the idea of just general measurement and think about what components of data collection are involved. So there's a great article from two authors, Olswang and Bain. This is a publication from the speech language pathology literature, and it reviews the importance of this concept of data collection, just in case anyone out there needs a nerdy reference to go along with all of the things, all the things we're saying. Data can be used to justify our treatment decisions. So if you're having a contentious conversation with a parent, with a team member, and your clinical judgment is being questioned, your data is there to back you up. Your data is going to guide your clinical decision making. So, are they making progress? Is the intervention you've chosen working? If it's not working, why? Your data is going to be your guidepost and your compass as to whether or not you are providing that ethical, effective service. And without your data, you can't be accountable. So you can't be held, you can't be accountable to the past, present, or future decision making. It's also not listed on the slide, but for those of you who are working to try and get AAC devices funded, or you're trying to, work through some other infrastructure for your client, or God forbid you have a lawsuit on your hands, right? There are many, many reasons outside of ethics, like liability, for us to take data. So it's a really, really important concept. It's also critical for goal writing, and as well as progress monitoring, which we already mentioned. We really have to monitor progress for our students. We have to know if our treatment is working, and we have to have information available to us about our communication partners. And we know that communication partner involvement and communication partner success is a critical piece for our AAC users to be making progress. And without our data collection, we really don't have any. We don't have any checkpoints. We don't have any checks and balances to make sure that we are moving in the right direction. So we've already mentioned some of these points. Data is the solution for so many things so many problems in your work life balance, in your professional environment, that you may not realize. Everything from whether or not your treatment is working, to how, as Amy mentioned, how you solve a disagreement with a colleague, or I've often used data collection as a counseling strategy. So if someone brings a client to me and it's really important to them to work on a certain skill, and I am not convinced that that certain skill is achievable, or if it's not an appropriate skill to work on, I might acquiesce and work on it for a short period of time to collect data, and then use that data as a talking point around why this isn't working, what else could be going on. It could also be used as a counseling strategy for other team members who think that your approach is wrong. This is the classic speech language pathologist, behavior analyst argument about whose approach is better. It can be a really nice way to diffuse emotion and judgment, because if you're taking accurate data and taking good data, you can let the numbers speak for themselves, and take some of that argument and emotion out of it. That's all the great things about data collection. Data collection does not come without, I guess I'll call it a price. Data collection can feel really, really hard. It can feel really intimidating. One of the things that we know about effective intervention is that it requires connection, it requires our attention. Communication is social. Communication requires feelings of vulnerability and safety. Um, Making a connection with our clients is a critical piece of creating a therapeutic atmosphere. And it's really hard to focus on doing that if you feel like your nose is in a clipboard, constantly scratching down every single thing that someone is saying. Data collection is intimidating for a lot of profiles in therapy, but it can feel extra intimidating when you've got this extra thing, this device, this extra thing sitting on the table. So you've got your client in front of you, they're talking to you or getting up out of their chair or asking you for something, and you're trying to answer the question, but you're supposed to be modeling on the device. You've got two golf counters attached to your belt, and you're supposed to be tallying something on a sheet. And before you know it, the communication moment is gone and your intervention moment is gone. So data can feel really intimidating, and we're going to walk through a couple strategies through this conversation to kind of give you some ways to continue to take accurate data without retracting from the connection that you have with your client. It's also really important to think about balancing your data collection time with the actual minutes you spend providing intervention. And there are ways to navigate through that process without retracting from attention for your client or direct minutes spent on intervention. And we will go through those.
We sure will. Kate gave some really nice examples of how we might use data collection. I think that will sound very familiar to the speech language pathologists who are listening to this. A lot of our focus on data collection is in the context of our therapy sessions with a client. So we're providing direct treatment. We're trying to also collect that internal evidence and determine whether our interventions are working or not working, or if there's something that we need to change. Uh, but really, we could zoom even farther out and think about data collection not just as something that we might do as the clinician, but as something that we might ask someone else to collect for us. So, really thinking about what is a well designed data collection system. A well designed data collection system is going to give us answers to questions. And the answers should help us refine our practice, refine our services to our clients, whether that's a client who we're working directly with in a one on one or group therapy session, or a client who we're consulting to their team and maybe coming in every now and then and trying to gather some data, help the team make some decisions, and then come back in the future. So, a well designed data collection system is going to give us good information. And we're going to talk more about good, I'm using air quotes, good information later on. But it's going to also be manageable for the people who were asking to implement it. I used to, before I went to back to school to become a speech pathologist, I worked as a direct care staff in a school and in home based programs. And when you're in a role like that, you're trying to take all of the important things that everybody tells you that you should be paying attention to and keep all of them front of mind. And it's sort of impossible. So, although I am a data nerd, I like to get a lot of data about my clients and use that information to make decisions. It's really important to be sure that I'm prioritizing the little bits of most important information, especially when I'm asking someone else to collect that data for me. So, if we're going to zoom back out, we're thinking about the development of data collection systems kind of more broadly as like we're journeying down a path, right? And our path starts with our observations. So, our observations are what's going to lead us to ask some questions. And we might end up saying, you know what, I need some more information. I'm going to do some more observations and develop some more questions. And what we really want to do is refine the question that we're trying to answer with the data so that it's really pretty narrow and well defined. And we're going to be able to collect our data in a way that's as simple and easy as possible for the people who are asking to collect that data for us. So we're hoping that the data that we are able to collect is going to answer our question, but we might find that it like raises a new question. We might find that it makes us refine and change our question, and that's okay. That's part of the process. If you want to go on to the next slide.
Sure. I was going to add, just for anyone who's listening, this concept of asking questions, I think, is something that might seem a little like simple, but also really important. It's one of those things that the question that you're asking may be your goal, it may not. And all of us have lots of questions about our clients. So if you're at the beginning of this process with any of your clients, I would encourage you to just take a second, pause the recording, and just write down a bunch of questions that you have about your clients. Everything from, I wonder why, just to get it flowing. I wonder why they're not communicating. I would really like for them to be doing this more. I wonder what's preventing them. I wonder what the staff in the group home think about this. We have so many questions as clinicians. And a lot of times connecting the data collection process to a question is the most important piece. So I just wanted to insert more of my talking just to emphasize the importance of a question and just give people an opportunity to reflect on it. It's not that deep. Sometimes these questions can start with with just the thoughts and the curiosity that we have about our clients.
I send you internet high fives. I totally agree. I think that when we're in sort of that detective asking question mode, that's when we're hopefully being open and flexible, not only to what's not working, but what is happening when things are working. What's happening when things are going right. So we're going to walk through a little bit of an example in the next few slides, just to sort of model that question asking process. That is sort of the first step in coming up with your data collection system. So let's say we, the clinicians, we're contacted by a parent who has some concerns that their adult child's new group home isn't promoting their AAC device use. So they've reached out to us. They're saying, hey, something's not working here. My adult child used to use his device a lot when he was in school. He's just not using it. So the parents reporting that their adult child can use their device to order at a restaurant. When they go out to a restaurant, they can use their device to say that they need the bathroom. So it's not a problem where the tool isn't functional for the client. It is functional. They're able to use it with their family. They're able to use it. They were able to use it in school, but they're just not using it now in this new environment. So we make a plan as the clinician to go first. We're going to go out to the group home. We're going to do an observation and see if we can come up with some questions that might help us get some answers. So let's say we get out there, we're doing our observation, and I notice, okay, the client doesn't have their device. They're at the food court, but the whole group is at the food court. They don't have their device. And so I'm curious, all right, I wonder why they don't have it with them today. I'm curious, how often does this happen, right? Is this just a one-off? Why did this happen? The parents reporting that they've seen them with their device sometimes in the community. So we have a feeling like sometimes it's happening, sometimes they're bringing it, sometimes they're not. So then I asked some questions. I talked to some of the direct care staff, and they share that sometimes they're remembering to bring it, sometimes they don't. So that's interesting information because it sounds like it's the direct care staff who are remembering to bring it. They're not saying sometimes he remembers. They're saying, oh, sometimes we remember to bring it, sometimes we don't. Okay, so we do some more observations, try and get in there during those transition times, because that would be when we're leaving the home, we're going out to the community. That's the time where it's really important to remember the device. And it seems like, yeah, they have their device with them about half the time. So some of the questions that I might come up with based on those observations and talking with some of the care staff might be, okay, what's happening? What's happening when they're bringing their device? What's happening when it's working? Is somebody just reminding them? If so, what does that look like? Is somebody just giving them a verbal direction? Is it an indirect cue? Is it something else? Are there a few direct care staff who are just remembering to bring the device for my client? So does it depend on who's working? Does it matter what the staff ratios are? Does it matter where the group is planning to go? Like maybe we always bring it when we go to the mall, but not necessarily when we go to a restaurant. Are there some other environmental variables that I'm not considering? And we'll talk more about this later in the presentation, but the SETT framework is a way for us to think not just about the variables specific to our client, but also about the environment and also about the specific communication tasks. Because communication doesn't happen in a vacuum, it happens in an interaction in a place with other people. And so those other people and places can have a really important effect on whether we see the skills that we want to see in our clients' communication. Uh, so, so I jumped ahead. It is important to remember that communication is happening with it. See, I love the SET framework too much. I'm like jumping ahead to it. It is important to remember that these environmental variables are really important. So when we're doing our observations and we're collecting some observational data, we're not necessarily just collecting information on the target skill. So the target skill of my client having their device. I'm also collecting some information and some observations about what's happening in the environment. Are there visual supports? Is there some sort of checklist that people are using? What does the transition look like overall? So when we're gathering this information, it's helping us ask questions, not just about the target skill, but about those influencing factors, right? So the data that I collect is not necessarily just about my client doing or not doing something. It might be data collected about factors in the environment, such as visual supports or what the transition looks like. So in this example, if our target is for our client to bring their device with them into the community, we know that sometimes things are working. We can see that things are working. Sometimes the client's bringing their device. And if I'm only collecting data on what the client is doing, let's say like I'm doing like a frequency count of the number of times they bring their device, I might be missing some really helpful information that could help guide intervention. If I'm able to know what those variables are, right? If one staff does remember to use a visual support, my intervention might be as simple as making sure all the remaining staff use that same visual support.
I want to reflect quickly on the story that you're telling. I think many of us, speech pathologists and behavior analysts, are trained clinically to measure and pay attention to the skills of the learner. What are they doing with the device? How are they touching the screen? What words are they using? But so much of what you just described was about the environment, was about the communication partners, was about whether or not they had access to things on hanging on the walls, whether or not, because and I know you said this already, I'm just going to say it again for emphasis. Communication is dynamic. What we are measuring here is not a static thing that just happens one time and then floats out into the ether. This is a phenomenon that is an interactive phenomenon across people, a message, people, more than one person, a message, and an environment. And if we don't consider measuring what's happening in that entire dynamic scene, then we are missing the fundamentals of communication. So I know you already said all those things. I'm just saying them again because it was really good and it's really important. And it's something that many of us are just not trained in.
I 100% agree with you. And I do think as a speech language pathologist, I don't know what your thoughts are on this, Kate, having both credentials, but I do think as a speech language pathologist, we're hyper focused on the client, right? We're like very focused on the client. I do feel like BCBAs tend to have a bit more training in terms of considering the environmental variables and how that um, might affect a target behavior of interest. But in general, I think it's so important for all of us as clinicians to be aware of just how powerful the environment and those related task factors can be. And connected with the data collection piece and refining our question and using that question to guide what specific data either we're collecting or we're asking someone else to collect. I think a unique piece with adult services is that oftentimes we're asking paid direct care staff who may be working at higher ratios. I always mess that up, higher or lower. There are more clients compared to the number of direct care workers compared to in, say, a school environment, for example. So we need to be really realistic and we really need to involve those people in the process of determining how we're collecting that data. It's really important that we're having an ongoing dialogue. If we're expecting a direct care staff to be collecting some of this data for us, we need to be getting their feedback and their input throughout the process to make sure that whatever we're asking them to do is a realistic and fair ask. Because if we create, I have a good example of I was working with a middle school team and I created this like beautiful, very, very detailed data sheet that I asked them to fill out for me. And they're such a good, sweet team. And they came to me a few weeks in and they were like, we just, it's just too much. We can't do it. It's just too much. And I think having the relationship with your team where they can give you that feedback is important. But that was also a really like pivotal learning moment for me as a clinician to say, okay, I want all of this information, but I can't get it all right now. So I need to pick the one or two most important pieces, and I'm going to follow up on that data. And then if I want more information later, that will be a separate ask.
I think I think behavior analysts, I think both speech pathologists and behavior analysts have the experience of focusing on the client. Behavior analysts have slightly more training in focusing on the environment. I'm not sure that either field has the specific training on focusing on the communication partner and really making sure that the communication partner is also receiving an intervention. Because we know from AAC research that the communication partner's competence and confidence is going to have a really big impact on the success of the AAC user. And we often, neither side, I think, thinks about applying interventions for the communication partner as a means of indirectly improving the skills of the AAC user. So I think both of the disciplines are, I mean, I think this is a very unique thing that we're talking about. It's a really unique thing, just to answer your question.
Thanks, buddy.
So you're welcome, buddy. Do you want to talk about garbage? I know you love
Sure,
talking about
I love talking
garbage.
about garbage. So this is a fun graphic which just shows a bunch of trash cans and recycling bins on the ground, and there's like a call out button, call out bubble on one side that says garbage in, and a call out bubble on the other side that says garbage out. And this image is meant to depict the importance of workable, manageable data collection systems. Because if we ask people to do impossible things, they're impossible, so they won't be able to do them. They will do their best job to do them, which means we will have very patchy bits of data that don't really answer our question and don't really tell us meaningful information about our client. Um, and so any decisions that we make informed by that data are also garbage. So it's really important that we're asking people to do reasonable, realistic things so that we're getting good information in and making good informed decisions based on that information.
As a side note, the first time Amy and I talked about this and she said garbage in, garbage out, I was like, what are you talking about? But it's such a great analogy. And I think a great segue into the concept of good data. So if we need to make sure that we are not receiving garbage information, because that bad information, that inaccurate information would lead us to poor decision makings about progress monitoring, poor decisions about altering our interventions, poor communication with all of our communication partners, right? Because if we're using our data to inform everything that we do, we want to make sure that it's not garbage in, garbage out. What we're getting is, I don't know, cupcakes in, cupcakes out, something else delicious. It's dinner time. I must be hungry. Um, so when we talk about the concept of good data, if we want cupcake data, we want those good pieces of information. What does that mean? Well, it starts with what Amy said, assigning things, thinking about data collection systems that are feasible, that are realistic, and that can be done in the environments where we're asking them to be done. We also need good data to be accurate, reliable, and valid. And this is something that if you're a BCBA and you're watching this, you know these things already, but stick with us because we are going to navigate through here and come back to how this relates to AAC, particularly in adults. So for the speech pathologists who are not aware of what is now called cupcake data in my mind, data that is accurate, reliable, and valid. Accurate data is when the observer values match the true values. So to give you an example, let's say you have a bunch of potatoes. This is our potato example that we love. And you take a scale and you put those potatoes on the scale. And the scale says that the potatoes weigh 1.5 pounds. That measurement is accurate if the potatoes actually weigh 1.5 pounds, right? So you trust that data because the potatoes actually weigh 1.5 pounds. The value on the scale matches the true value. We only want to make decisions based on accurate data. The second is reliable data. So reliable data is when the same values are produced over repeated measurements. So same example, you put the potatoes on the scale says 1.5 pounds. You take the potatoes off the scale, you come back an hour later, you put the potatoes back on the scale, it should say 1.5 pounds again, right? That measurement system should be consistently applied in a way where the output gives you reliable results. You can, again, trust it because the measurement system is reliable. If that scale came back and said 3.5 scale of 3.5 pounds, you might throw it in the garbage and be like, nobody ate any of these potatoes. It's the same potatoes. This scale is garbage. See, garbage in, garbage out. I'm making connections all over the place. The last one is valid data. So validity measures it, how well something measures what it is supposed to measure. And this one always threw me through a loop until we came up with an example. If you put those same potatoes on the scale and you want to know, your question is how much these potatoes weigh, but the scale gives you a result in the density of the potatoes. Density is not a valid measurement of pounds. That is not a valid measurement. So we want to make sure that the measurement systems we are using give us valid results that are measuring exactly what it is supposed to measure. And these three components are really important when you think back to our clinical questions. And we're going to give you examples of how a measurement could be accurate or inaccurate, reliable, unreliable, or invalid. Other good data considerations, there's more than one way to collect data. And I think that this is this is a trap. It's the I need to collect perfect data trap, or I need to record 100% of the occurrences of this behavior, or I'm going to miss something. There are more than one way. There's more than one way to collect data, and what you want to choose, the method that you want to choose has to be well matched not only to your question, but to the feasibility of of applying that measurement system. It has to be really well matched to the target skill. And we're going to talk a lot about this in a minute when we go through different data collection strategies. Has to be well matched to the environment, the time demands. This is a huge one, particularly for when you're talking about having staff take measurement for you, and that staff is overworked or underpaid or super stressed out or managing a classroom of too many students, or they have too many members in the day hab that they need to look over. These realistic limitations are, not to be redundant, they're real. They exist. This is the reality of the systems that we're working in. So we want to make sure that whatever we choose is outside of our narrow, rigid, scientifically perfect idea. It just has to be reliable, accurate, and valid and feasible. Um, and we also want to make sure that we're choosing a system that is related to the goal, because again, we are all beholden to our funding systems, we're all beholden to our ethical codes, we're all beholden to the goals that we write for IEPs or IFSPs or ISPs or whatever your systems are. And we really need to make sure that we're measuring what we said we were going to measure.
Okay. So another way that we can think about clinical data that we're collecting is whether it falls into the quantitative or qualitative bucket. um, Quantitative data is going to tell us numbers. I feel like this is what you think of when you think of data, right? So many of us who are in the allied health or special education fields, we use a lot of quantitative data, and the data is helpful, right? We can graph it, we can see movement or progress or lack of progress pretty easily when we review it. Other stakeholders like family members, third party funding, they can look at the progress that we're reporting by via quantitative methods. They can understand the progress as well, and it's definitely an important tool for the clinician, but it's not the only tool for the clinician. There's also qualitative data, which is still data, and it tells us additional information that's not necessarily quantified in numbers, but can be described in words. So when we think about adjectives, we think about adverbs, these descriptive data are still data. So quantitative data is not the only type of data worth collecting. Qualitative data can still be interpreted and analyzed. Qualitative data, you can code it, you can score it in a way that even allows for quantitative analysis if you want. Qualitative data can give us some really helpful information to refine those clinical questions that we were talking about. Qualitative data can be really helpful when we're looking at those environmental variables or we're looking at some differences across different types of tasks. It might be more time consuming to record in real time. So that is a real factor to think about with qualitative data, but it doesn't mean that it's not worth it to collect it. Kate has a good
I have a little
qualitative
story.
data
It's like
story.
just story. It's story time.
Story
So
time.
I have heard from behavior analysts that I have worked with before a phenomenon that I've also heard from the speech language pathology community. So both sides have brought to my attention that qualitative data is not worth taking. One of the instances was listening to a podcast about AAC. It's a very, very well known podcast about AAC. And they were talking about how their intervention, they were really concerned that their intervention wasn't working. They were having an argument with a behavior analyst around the intervention that was happening. And the recommendation that the podcast host made was, well, don't take any data. Don't take any data. Just take a video. And I raged quietly with my headphones on in my car or wherever I was, because a video is data. A video is qualitative data. The story that Amy told earlier started with observation. And we're going to tell a lot more stories about how qualitative data can be leveraged and measured. It's not necessarily biased, it can be done in a measured way to inform our treatment. And this can be a huge piece, especially when we're thinking about our EBP triangle of following and making sure that our treatment is person centered and to make sure that it aligns with client perspectives and values. And those are critical pieces for both fields. Just my little story. It made me very
Yeah.
angry. I got
It's a
over
good
it.
start. Well, it's not, it's just like sad, right? It's like I think it's a challenge for all of us to help spread the word that there are actually lots of different ways that we can collect data, and finding the one that best suits your clinical situation is what we all want to help everybody else do, right? So qualitative and quantitative data also doesn't have to be an either or situation. So we have some data collection methods like rubrics, permanent products, surveys, or interviews. They can be quantitative or qualitative, and in a lot of cases, a mix of methods might best answer some of our clinical questions. So not only, this is like where I get so excited. I love discontinuous data. So not only can we sort our data into boxes by quantitative and qualitative, we can also sort into continuous data collection and discontinuous data collection. So when we talk about continuous and discontinuous data in speech and language, we're not using the mathematical term. I know that that's like a different term. We're just talking about practical application in the context of data collection. Okay, here we go. Continuous data collection. Geez, do I love it. Do you want to advance the slide? Thank you. Okay. So continuous data collection is talking about recording every single instance of a target skill. An obvious potential con to this approach is the fact that it's very labor and time intensive. A pro is that continuous data collection, if you implement it accurately and reliably, it gives us a true measure of the target skill in any moment in time under the specified parameters, right? So if we say it a different way, when we're talking about continuous data, that is giving us real information about what actually happened. And when I came out of grad school, I don't know, for me, I don't know about you, Kate, but I feel like I thought the continuous data collection was like the only option, right? Like
Yep.
that's how you collect data. You collect continuous, you write every single thing down on a post-it note, and then you like frantically try and sum it at the end of your session, but somebody else is coming in. Um, and I think part of why I thought that was because that's how the research that we're reading in school is designed for the most part, especially in the field of speech language pathology, right? So we read a lot of studies, and those studies are generally conducted using a continuous data collection method. But in the real world, like I don't have a grad student to record my session and then watch it and rewatch it and rewatch it and rewatch it and code it and transcribe it. Like, so that's great for researchers to be doing, because I do, we do want their research to be the actual true representation of what happened, right? In a given intervention or whatever. We want them to have collected the data, the true data that represents what happened, to answer their clinical question. We want to know that that dependent variable was actually influenced or not influenced. Like we want that answer. But that is generally a criteria that the practicing clinician is not able to achieve in clinical practice. So what happens is when we try and collect that continuous data in a clinical setting where we're also providing intervention, or we're managing a group, or we're doing like really any other task, what we end up with is not nice continuous data. What we end up with is continuous data done badly. So we end up with garbage. And this is where my buddy discontinuous data comes in. So discontinuous data, that refers to recording a sample of a target skill rather than every instance of that skill. And you might have heard the term probe data. That's also talking about a discontinuous data approach. A huge pro of this method is that it's way less labor intensive, it's way less time intensive than continuous data collection. And that's not true just for the actual collecting of the data, but the reason we collect the data is so that we can analyze it and think about it and make decisions about changing or doing something different in our treatment approach to make sure that we're helping our client make progress toward their shared goals, right? So discontinuous data is going to give you fewer data points, which not only makes it easier to collect, it makes it easier to analyze. So a potential drawback of discontinuous data collection is that it doesn't tell us the true information. It tells us an estimate of the true information. So just to say that again, Our continuous data collection is collecting all of the data and it's telling us a true picture of what really happened in that moment. Discontinuous data collection is giving us a sample, which we can then use, but it's an estimate of what truly really happened. And there are certain types of discontinuous data that are going to tend to overestimate the amount of time something actually happened. There are some methods that are going to tend to underestimate the amount that actually happened. And there are strategies that us clinicians can employ to increase our confidence in how much we believe the estimated information that we get from our discontinuous data. This doesn't make discontinuous data bad. In fact, it's really going to make your data more accurate than it would be if people were just collecting continuous data badly, right? So when we're collecting discontinuous data, we're not just randomly sampling some data. We're using a specific planned approach to sample a consistent sample of our clients' target skills. And then we're using that information to make decisions. Whereas if we're just doing continuous data collection badly, we're just kind of randomly collecting the data and sometimes we get it and sometimes we don't. So discontinuous data, I find, is a really, really good fit for when we're also focused on anything else, which is almost all of the time. Okay. Also, some data collection methods that we're going to discuss are going to be inherently discontinuous. So things like interval or time sampling data, that's always sampling just a portion of what actually happened. So that's always just giving us an estimate of what really just happened. We can also use other data collection methods like frequency or accuracy, and we can use them in a discontinuous manner instead of a continuous manner. And so we're going to get later on, we'll go to a slide where we discuss accuracy data, and we'll give some additional information about considerations for discontinuous accuracy data, as well as some tips for increasing your confidence that your estimate that you're getting from your data collection is a pretty good estimate. Okay. So let's say we want accuracy data on a skill, but we want to have that data across multiple sessions so we can see if our client is learning. And let's say we know we have like thought about collecting continuous data. We know that that's impossible and that will give us bad garbage data. So we're not going to do that. So we want to collect just enough data so we have some information to make treatment decisions, but not so much data that it like pulls us out of the clinical interaction, keeps us from actually having like a meaningful exchange with our client, or keeps us from, supporting their care team or their other communication partners. So we have some references linked at the end of the slides. We've read a couple of articles just looking at data. So data looking at how can you use that discontinuous probe data in a way that you can be more confident that it's going to be accurate. And we've seen a couple of things. So you could use just the first trial. So the first trial meaning like that first discrete teaching opportunity in a session. So the session would be, let's say you're working with your client, you're working with them for 15 minutes. You're going to do, in that 15 minutes, you're going to do 10 labeling tasks. You say, what's this? We're using like a kind of structured example here, but you might say, what's this? What's this? What's this? You're going to do that 10 times. Each time you say, what's this? And you show the picture, that's a trial, right? That's like a defined, discrete teaching opportunity. So you may say, I'm going to just collect data on that very first, what's this, that I asked them the very first time, and I'm going to collect that data. Well, what we know from people who have done research looking at data about data is that kind of gives you a good estimate, but not as good as it would if you had collected the data on all 10 times you asked, right? So we know that if you collect a little bit more data, like if you collect data on the first 3 times you ask, and you do that across a couple of different sessions, that's actually a pretty good estimate and gives you a pretty good match compared to if you had collected data all 10 times. And that doesn't matter quite as much in the like sort of discrete trial, like structured teaching opportunity, but where that discontinuous data can be really helpful is in a more naturalistic environment. Okay, great. I don't have to like follow my client around all day with a clipboard and try and catch every single time that he asks for help or says he needs a break. I can just pay attention to the first like 3 to 5 times that he does it. And then I'm still going to continue my intervention all day long. But I have those first 3 trials of data that I've recorded. I think one other piece that we found, if you want to scoot on to the next slide, um, one other piece that we found is that you may choose to collect little bits of probe data. You might want to collect this data collection at the beginning, which is going to give you more information about your client's true skills without any teaching. You may also want to, if you're introducing a new skill, or a newer skill, or you're fading your support on a skill, or you're doing it in a new environment or with new partners, you might also want to collect a little bit of probe data. So, like the last 3 trials, you might want to also collect that data and keep that data separate. There is a slide here that references, I think, the Lerman article. If you want to read an article, read the Lerman article, and they talk about the differences between collecting just that first little piece of data versus the first 3 trials, and doing it across one data point versus multiple days of instruction. One other piece that's really helpful from that article is they talk about how if you collect not just plus minus accuracy data, but if you code it for your prompting hierarchy, that's going to give you even more detail, and it's going to increase the accuracy of the estimate that you're getting from your probe data.
And just to kind of bring us back out again to we went into a data hole. It's what we
We
do.
did.
I hope everyone is still with us.
Yeah.
But if you think now that we've kind of like gone through it, I know you have more to say about individualizing it and everything. But I want to take a second to just ping back to that picture of you either sitting in front of your client, they're talking to you, or they're getting up out of your seat, you've got the device, and you're thinking, I don't know what to do. This is our answer to this
Yeah.
problem. I know the behavior analysts who are listening to this are like, oh, I took a whole class on measurement. I know what discontinuous data is. I hope that this provided a refresher on the data about the data and how we can make it even more accurate, reliable, and valid. And not only that, but many BCBAs work in a consultative model. So how can we think about training our communication partners, or training the DayHab staff, or training other individuals to take good data less often in some of these naturalistic environments?
I think another piece connected with that is that's part of the great thing about working with other allied healthcare providers, right? So everybody's bringing some different unique skill set to the relationship, and you're all working together to help support your client. So if you are the BCBA on the team and you see the speech language pathologist or some other team member trying to collect lots and lots of continuous frantic data, feel free to share with them. Or if you're the speech pathologist today learning about discontinuous data and some strategies to make that more effective, it's not just collecting a sample of your data, it's collecting a structured sample of the data. So it's not just saying, I'm going to collect 3 data points, maybe the first 3, maybe the last 3, maybe 3 in the middle, maybe when I'm near my post-it notes. It's about having a plan for how you're going to collect that small subset of data. So share that information with your colleagues who may be feeling like they can't collect data at all because it's just too much, it's overwhelming, and help share the information that you actually can collect a small subset of data in a planned manner that's consistent across sessions, and it can give you a pretty good estimate. So that's different than continuous data, but in reality, it's probably better because I can't collect good continuous data in my clinical practice, and I'm maybe there's somebody out there who can, but I think discontinuous data is a more realistic ask for everybody.
Amy, did we cover everything on this slide? Do you want me to move
Yeah,
it
I think
forward?
we did. I think we did.
How about this one?
Okay.
Okay. Um, so we're about to walk you through a bunch of different data collection strategies that are either continuous or discontinuous. Um, but we want to reframe all of this in terms of what it is that you really need to know, and what is going to be the most functional to go into work tomorrow and rethink how we can apply these things in a functional way. And we've already talked about this in through a lot of different angles, but as we talk about the different types of data collection and how we go about collecting data, I want you to think about all of the other tasks that the people that you might need to be doing, that your communication partners need to be doing, what the environments look like, everything from how loud it is, to who is usually there, what your communication partner might need to do in those environments, and really all of the context around the communication skill that you want to measure. I think it's great. I mean, sometimes when you're taking PD and you want to really make it functional, pick a client in your mind to kind of think about. Look at the questions that you wrote down earlier in this recording, and ask yourself how you might go about measuring some of those things. That's you, Aim.
Thanks, buddy. I see you on a different dot. Okay, here we are. So operational definitions are really, really important. So this may be familiar to all the people, but it's worth a refresher. Um, Operational definitions are the key to helping us generate that good data. So you need to know exactly what your scoring is, and you need to be able to communicate that. If you're asking somebody else to collect your data, you need to be able to communicate that in a way so that you're all on the same page and everybody's going to collect the same data. If everyone walked into a room and observed the situation, we would all walk out with the same data on our data sheet because we've made a really nice operational definition. So, for example, one thing we might want to define would be what is an initiation, right? So, we might want to increase our clients' initiations for communication. So, what does that look like? Maybe that's looking, maybe that's reaching, maybe that's vocalizing with a specific like pattern or intonation. It could be a specific idiosyncratic body movement, but we want to be sure that when we're defining what an initiation is, everybody who we're asking to collect that data is on the same page about what counts, right? So, what counts as an initiation? What does that look like? I find it can be really helpful to write the definition onto the data sheet. That's for me as well as for other people. It is helpful for me to have the definition that I wrote written on my data sheet because then it helps me remember what that definition was. If you're having a busy day, you haven't slept well, you've had back-to-back clients all day, you could just look down at the data sheet and say, oh yeah, that's right, this is what I said was an initiation, we're counting all of these things. It helps prevent like observer drift over time. So if you're working with a client and you start working with them, you're giving them credit for certain things. This comes up sometimes, I feel like, Kate, in speech and language and articulation and intelligibility, right? As we
Mhm.
get to know a client better, we better understand their oral speech and speech patterns. If we've clearly defined what that target is, we're always referring back to that target to make sure our scoring doesn't drift over time as we become more familiar listeners for our client. If we're thinking about operational definitions for qualitative data, that might mean developing a communication partner checklist or a questionnaire that we might ask direct care staff to fill out at regular intervals. So maybe every 2 months, we're asking the direct care staff to fill out this same questionnaire. We might use a combination of numeric rating scales, which is sort of like a quantifiable component, open ended descriptive questions, which is going to give us some of that qualitative data. And we might just have check in points where we're asking people to give us some of this data. And that might be particularly helpful if staffing is a real issue. You're at least getting some feedback and some dialogue with the communication partners over time. Um, and yeah,
Something
I
I
think
wanted
just
to, oh, go ahead.
yeah, no, I was just going to say it's helpful to be organized regardless what method of data collection you're using to make sure you have those operational definitions in place and written down, ideally.
Right. And I was just going to add that something I learned from you years ago is the importance of permanent product and visual cues for our communication partners. So having the data sheet hung up at the door so that someone, your communication partner or your paraprofessional staff or your day hab staff are going to leave and there's a question right on the door that they can circle something or do something quickly. Um, Embedded things that are embedded in their environment, things that are accessible, things that they don't that the response effort for the communication partners is low is really, really important. Another thing I wanted to quickly address, and Amy, forgive me if I missed this. I'm not sure if this is written on any other slides, but it can often be really tempting to use the internal data collection tracking systems of high tech tools. So, a lot of our high tech tools have internal data collection within them. And they're very tempting to use, and they have some strengths. And Amy, I'm sure you have more to say than I do. But we generally would say to just exercise a little bit of caution when you're using those internal data collection tools for a few reasons. The first of which, it might not be accurate because it's only going to capture the times that the screen is touched. So if you have someone who's doing, there's a lot of aided language modeling happening, or they're touching the screen for non-communicative purposes, it's not going to capture the context. The second piece is for privacy reasons. It was described, Amy, I think you told me about this, so maybe you can elaborate, but I remember hearing at some point an AAC user describing what it might feel like to have someone following you around, listening to everything you say all day, and how violating that might be. So it could be considered a violation of someone's privacy to have these things turned on and just monitoring their communication all day long and pushing that data up into a cloud for other people to read at their leisure. And the last thing is that depending on the setting that you're in, using some of these could also violate some privacy law in terms of whether or not Amy, I think I also learned this from you, particularly in a school setting. I don't know if you have anything more to add about that.
Yeah, so we have in the public schools we have student data privacy laws, so that's a concern. And any apps, any software, anything that we're using essentially that collects student data needs to adhere to a student data privacy policy. So there is that piece. There's the privacy of the files that are being uploaded. But I think the bigger piece for me, and I think Kate, you were reflecting on. There's a really nice article from the AAC vendor Assistiveware. They're the people who make
Yes,
Proloquo
that's it.
products. Yeah. So if you're listening and you're curious about that, and you'd like to give a think on the privacy piece and how important it is to have a conversation and consent from the people whose data you might be interested in logging, I would definitely encourage you to check out the Assistiveware article. I don't recall the exact title, but I think if you type Assistiveware data logging, it should pop up. You'll find it. The Google robots will help you. But
So
it's a
as
good
we
read.
think about, the different contextual factors that we can leverage to facilitate data collection, that is a popular one. But just be cautious when using it because it might not give you accurate data. It has some ethical considerations and it could be illegal depending on your setting.
Yeah, it should be a thoughtful shared decision if you're going to use it. I think that it's important to involve the client and any guardians in the making of that decision about if and how that information will be collected and used.
And with that said, we are now going to talk about all of the specific ways that you can collect data that is not frequency data. Frequency data is the tallying of all of the things on the sticky note that we as speech pathologists tend to think about data collection. For behavior analysts watching, this is a very familiar list to you. But for each one of these, we're going to go through what it is, and we're going to give an example for exactly how it could be used towards AAC, and what kind of skill or what kind of question it might be well suited to. So first, frequency. So frequency is defined as how often something happens. It's also called a tally or a tally count. It's really good for measuring discrete events. So something starts and stops very clearly. And it's really good. And it measures things very consistently over time. Um, Amy, what could you tell us? Give us an example of an appropriate an appropriate clinical context to use frequency data in AAC.
So, to merge frequency and discontinuous data, two of my loves, you might want to monitor how often your client independently plugs the charger into their AEC device as part of their nighttime routine. So, that would be like one data point. Did it happen or not happen? Collected over a series of days. So, after a week, how often did it happen?
Well, everybody knows these first few, so we're gonna go through them. This is just an example of what a frequency data sheet might look like. The next is rate. So how often something happens in a specific time interval. So adding time onto frequency. This gives you a little bit more detail than frequency data alone, and it can be a better choice if the duration of your data collection varies. How might rate be applied to AAC data collection?
So this, like, to give a more like structured clinical example, you might want to see how often your client initiates using symbolic communication. So let's say our client initiates, so the first person to say something using symbolic communication, so using their device or their oral speech, and they do that 15 times in 60 minutes. So we would take that 15, we would divide it by 60, and we would say, oh, they initiated using symbolic communication 0.25 times an hour.
Cute little data sheet. Moving right along. Percent accuracy, another very popular one. How often something happens in a predetermined accurate criteria versus not at all in that criteria. So we see these a lot in speech pathologies, and 80% of opportunities. It's good for when you need to know how accurately a client demonstrates a skill. It can be really easily understood. This is a measurement that many people are very familiar with interpreting. It's also the default in a lot of situations, which is not great. But Amy, when would be an instance when this is a appropriate and well matched measurement?
So we might want to see our client using a correct pre-stored phrase to request their prescription at the pharmacy, right? So we might go to the pharmacy a number of times across a period of a month or two and mark how many times they were accurate and how many times they were inaccurate in using the correct phrase to request their prescription.
Cute little data collection sheet on that. We're going to keep moving along. Okay, duration. We're starting to get into some of the less frequently seen measurements, at least as far as AAC goes. So, duration is how long something happens. And it's a really good measurement for a skill where you need to know how long something takes. So, when in AAC would we want to use a duration method of data collection? What kind of skill is this well matched for?
So, something that's a real challenge for AAC, including high tech AAC, is that it's going to be slower than oral speech, right? So, it's going to be slower than oral speech. So, for some clients, they may have multiple physical access methods. You may have clients who are curious about when they're using scanning with a switch, when they're using direct select with their finger. I had a client who really wanted to use scanning, and then we looked at duration to see, okay, if you say this exact same message using your direct select with your finger, it takes you this long, but when you scan it, it takes you like 7 times as long. So just that's helpful information for us to have as we're making decisions about when and where we're going to use our scanning. That also could be helpful when you're trying to make decisions about whether it makes sense for your client to generate the phrase or use a pre-stored phrase. So, for example, if your client is going to McDonald's a lot of times, they always order the same thing at McDonald's, it's their favorite thing. Maybe it makes sense for them to have a pre-stored phrase that they can use for their order or for components of their order. And you can compare that to the duration. So, does it take them like 5 minutes and 18 seconds to compose their order using icon sequencing versus like 2 minutes using a combination of two different pre-stored phrases? So that's probably the piece where I've looked most at duration.
Cute little data sheet. Moving right along. And here we have the beginning of our discontinuous data. So this is interval and time sampling. Did something happen during a specific repeated duration of time? Um, this is one of the most, I think, helpful components of starting to get into some of the more helpful strategies for accurately capturing data in a meaningful and realistic way. Amy, what is a great example of how to use interval time sampling for AAC?
So interval time sampling can be really helpful because especially in the age of like smartwatches, right? So you can just set a timer on your watch. It can vibrate. It's unobtrusive. People don't know that you don't have to have like a loud timer going off. So what you're doing when you're collecting interval data is you've set a timer and you're either collecting information about did it happen at all or was it happening when my timer went off. So let's say we're collecting data to see did it happen at all during the time interval. So we're doing a partial interval data collection. And let's say we have a client who's working on a work site and they have identified like they want to work on social engagement, right? They're like, hey, I know I'm not that social at my work site. I've gotten feedback from my job coach. Like, I think it's important. So what you've done is you've asked their direct care staff to get some data for you. So your client has a tendency to complete their work tasks away from their group, but they know that they like want to be a little bit more social with their work crew. So to start off, it's hard to be social with people if you are physically not near them. So let's say that we have the direct care staff just collect some partial interval data to see how often is our client more than 5 feet away from all the other people in their work crew, right? So we might say for 15 minutes, every 3 minutes, you're just going to track whether they were within 5 feet of the group or far away, right? And then at the end, you can use that information to collaboratively plan with your client and say, hey, so here's one thing you could start off with. You could start just being physically a little closer in proximity, because when we look at this data, there was only one time out of 15 minutes that you were within 5 feet of the group. So that's one way that you might use it. I don't know if you had any other.
No, I think that's a really great example. And I think this is something that feels a little bit more feasible for people when you're asking them to take data, because as the consultant or as the speech pathologist or the behavior analyst, we're not with the work crew. We're not necessarily present in all of these naturalistic environments, and teaching someone how to do this feels a lot more doable, particularly with the technology we have with smartwatches and that kind of thing. So
And as awesome
late
as
oh, go ahead.
as awesome as discontinuous data is, just remember that is discontinuous data. So it's just giving you an estimate. Just giving you an estimate.
Latency, how long it takes for something to start happening after something else has happened. This is another, I think, not very well appreciated measurement. And it's really great for when you need to know how long it takes something to begin happening. Amy, when would be a good time for this in AAC measurement?
I like latency data to look at supports that are in place to support communication. So whether something needs to be an accommodation, right? Like my eyes don't work quite right. I always wear glasses or contacts. That's an accommodation. I always need that. No amount of like snacks is going to help me see far away. Like that's just not how my eyes are made. And that's true for our clients too sometimes, right? So you may just have trouble with your auditory memory, and no amount of really powerful reinforcement system is going to change that. And so then we look at accommodations and we might want to see, okay, am I better off with like a text-based list or a photograph or a video model? And we might want to use latency data to see, okay, if we've given our client a job or a task or a chore to do, is there a difference in how long it takes them to start doing that task with the different types of accommodations that we might put in place, right? So we might say, okay, it turns out if we have a printed piece of paper, it's still taking a long time and some staff redirections. But if we give them a video model, they can actually like go right ahead and press play and get going and like do their task independently within like 1 minute. So latency, I think, is sometimes helpful around visual supports for communication or independence.
And trials to criterion. Um, This is one of my favorites, and I'm going to go through it quickly because I know we're running out of time and we want to get to the SETT framework. So, trials to criterion is how long it takes, how many teaching trials or opportunities does it take for a client to meet a predetermined criterion? And the example that I have for here is a student I was working with, and the staff were reporting that they had taught him a word and he wasn't using it. And why wasn't he using it? He had mastered this word. And my answer to them was, well, he's not using it because he hasn't mastered this word. We have not functionally taught him this word. I know there's a beautiful graph and we did all your trials and everything. But the question then became, how many learning opportunities does he need to actually learn the word? How many exposures does he need to learn the word? So for me, this measurement is less about asking what a child knows or what a person knows, what an AAC user knows, and more about how do they learn? How many learning opportunities do you need? And we went through a series of designs to try and figure out how many teaching opportunities this kiddo needed. And it was something like over 400 opportunities, 400 exposures to learn one word. But once we had that recipe, we could rinse, repeat. We could apply that same methodology across multiple vocabulary opportunities. So trials to criterion is less for me about the skill itself and more about the trials and learning, thinking about how how a person learns, as opposed to what they know. And then, surveys and interviews, we've talked about these a little bit. Qualitative data is really important. These are ways that you can collect information from stakeholders, learn more about environments that help you ask better questions. These are also methods that, in an iterative process where maybe you've been taking data for a while and your data is informing you that things are not going as they should, or there's kinks in the hose and you're trying to figure it out. Coming back to surveys, interviews, observations, and some of our other qualitative methods are a great way to create that iterative process and kind of rinse, repeat, reform our questions and move through additional data collection. And the same with observations. Amy, I hope it's okay that I'm kind of cruising through these. I just want to make sure we get to the SET framework. Observations are another critical piece for um, making sure that we're formulating questions that are empowering and functional and helpful for our more complex learners, especially in adulthood. Amy, I'll let you talk about rubrics because you know them. I know you love them.
I love you know them too. No, rubrics are awesome. So what a rubric does is it sort of combines a lot of different elements, right? It lets us be descriptive. It lets us provide scoring, so we can often get like a quantitative and a qualitative bit of information. And one thing that I really like about rubrics, I guess as somebody with a sort of poor memory, I don't know, is that I write all of the things down there, right? So I can always remind myself of what I'm looking for. Kate, if you want to scoot forward to the next slide, we can see an example. So here's something, right? Like we might have a rubric that we give to our staff that helps just remind everybody what our client is working on, right? So our client is doing some ordering in the community at a restaurant. We're paying attention to what can they independently do on their device? Are they independently ordering their food and their drink, just the food or the drink, or are they not ordering anything independently? And then what was the most supportive cue that they needed if they needed a cue, right? So maybe our client needs 0 cues, maybe our client needs a verbal reminder. That is also embedding in there our prompt hierarchy for our staff. So that's helpful for me. That's helpful for direct care staff. And it's all written down there and it gives us a permanent product. So what we're asking, our ask, if we're not the person collecting the data ourselves, is just take this printed sheet and circle the relevant boxes. And there you're done. Your data's done. And then they have a permanent product that they can either collect or you can like import it into some sort of data analytic tool, like even like Google Sheets. But yeah, rubrics are fun.
So I think, our key takeaways are pretty clear. Data collection is awesome. Um, it's a form of assessment. Amy, do you want me to scoot forward to the SET framework?
Yeah, because I love the SET framework. Yeah,
Oh, here. Oh, I went too far. There you go.
it's all right. It's exciting. Let me catch up to you. Hold on a second. All right, there I am. There we go. Okay, so the SET framework was developed by Joy Zabala, who was an assistive technology professional who was using it in the context of school-based assessments looking at assistive technology. However, this framework is awesome and really can be applied across all areas of clinical practice. So, what we're looking at and how we're organizing our information is the S or the C, if we're using client instead of student, is we're thinking about what do we already know? What are some questions we might have about our client's existing skills, right? So, this is the part of the data collection that I used to focus on almost entirely when I first got out of school. I paid attention to my client, what were their strengths, what were their areas where they needed support, and that was where I focused. The SET framework tells us, hey, silly, that's not the whole picture. We also need to look at these other components. So the E stands for the environment. This is information we may know or questions we may have about the environment. I think this is super important when we're thinking about AAC because there are a lot of supports that can be inherent in the environment or that we can add to the environment that will help facilitate more supported and robust communication, and may not require any other changes on the part of the communication partner, right? So it may be as simple as, putting the checklist on the door that says, wait, did you bring your device, right? And that's a reminder to our clients, that's a reminder to the direct care staff, and it's right there, and nobody has to even remember to get the reminder sheet because it's taped right onto the door. The first T stands for tasks. So that's information we may know or questions we may have about the communication task, because we know that communication is relational and it's within environments. And so that same client who may independently come up with this really robust utterance to order their favorite food at their favorite restaurant might not communicate at all at the drugstore, right? Might have zero cares in the world to tell the person that he needs his prescription. So we need to be aware of that and vary our expectations based upon different performance depending on those variables, those environment and task variables. And then the last T stands for tools. So
Okay.
we're really thinking about what are the tools that best fit those situations. And I know we're focused on high tech tools, but sometimes those are light tech tools too. It might just be the picture sequence in the bathroom that reminds you of all the steps that you need to do, to wash your hands and close the door and like put your things away when you're done in there. Okay. I'm,
Oh,
I'm trying to find your slide. There we go. Um, so yeah, I think that when we're thinking about how we might be collecting data under those different parameters, here are some things we might be looking for, right? In our example, we're curious about, does our student bring their device independently into the community? We might also wonder, like, can they follow a checklist? That's something that's specific about our students. So we're circling back to that like first example of the parent who called us about their adult child who's in the group home and is only sometimes using their device in the community, right? So things that may be unique to that student or that client would be, how independent are they with transporting their device? Are they able to follow a checklist? Are they able to follow a visual schedule? Some of that information might lead us to say, hey, this client can solve their own problem. Maybe we'll just give them a checklist and make them responsible for following their checklist. Um, but in trying to solve that problem, we might also look at the environment. Does the DayHab have embedded visuals? Would that be helpful? What are their staffing ratios like? Does that matter? What does the service delivery look like? What is the motivation for both the support staff and the client to have their device or not have it? Then we think about the tasks that are associated with the client bringing their communication device out into the community, right? Like, so they can they locate it? If it's not in a, do they have a specific spot where it lives in their group home? Are they able to find it if it's there or not there? Can they pick it up independently? Can they carry it independently? Do they generalize these skills across different environments like the van, the DayHab, the different community sites? So we might also think about, are there other tools that we could add into the situation that might help our client more independently bring their communication device out in the community? Would it help them to have a visual schedule? Could they complete a self monitoring sheet? Do they need a strap for their device so they can wear it instead of carry it? Do they need a case or a bag? So using this framework can kind of help us integrate all of that information that we might have from observations, from surveys or checklists, from specific data collection. Maybe we had people fill out a rubric, or we had somebody collect some frequency data for us. And using this framework can help kind of organize all that information in a way that we as the clinician can better integrate it and figure out what our next steps are for problem solving.
and that's it. So this is a QR code. It will take you to our clinic website where you can go, where you can get a hold of us if you have additional questions. We love talking about data, obviously, and all things AAC. So we hope that this was helpful, and please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you do have questions. Erin, were there any questions?
We didn't have any questions in the chat, no.
Okay.
That was very comprehensive. I loved, just to comment, I love all the emphasis that you put on communication partner training, and meeting their needs and the, good data less often. Because I feel like that really is, a huge factor, where we are in adult services is, like you said, that ratio. You're one adult, one kind of leader or direct support staff, and you might have 4 or 5 people in the group or 3 different people in the home. You know, people are at capacity all the time. And I think it really takes that burden off of them. They feel more empowered and more confident if we can give them data tools that they feel really good about. They feel like they know they can get it accurately and they are helping and they're seeing progress on their own.
Agreed.
Yeah.
It's a hard environment. And I think, one of that, we didn't go over this that much, but there is so much literature on the importance of communication partners and communication partner training. As a matter of fact, we have one extra slide all the way down here, just in case we didn't have time. And I'll just read this quote and we'll end on this note. So, just as a dance couldn't possibly be a dance unless people moved to it, so language doesn't become communication until people grow to understand and express it back. It has to be a two-way exchange. This is why communication is an action word. It is so critically important. So, empowering our communication partners with data collection strategies, but also interviewing them to learn about their competence and their needs it's also a very effective intervention. And I'll go back to my question slide
Absolutely.
now.
I
I
was
just
gonna
had to say
say
that. I love that quote.
that is a great quote. And we are right on 8:30. So I just want to be respectful to anybody joining us live. Thank you very much for being with us. Again, please go to our website where you registered, and that'll have information on how to obtain the CEUs, either under the Earning CEUs tab if you haven't done it before, or there is a direct link now where you registered under this April webinar. So thank you very much for joining us.